The London conference, and some of the panelists and academics will have attended that. That was entitled Muslim World in Transition, Contributions of the Gulen Movement. 3 days at the House of Lords, SIRS and LSE. The Conference Organising Committee for London have helped organise this. We've tried to provide the material, but really and truly the people here, you've seen them, Kate and Gürkan and Issam, various other people on the Conference Organising Committee have been putting this all together. So really thanks to them. But just to say something that is common to both conferences, and that is the theme of Gulen and the Gulen movement and why we're looking at this. And I'm aware that there are guests among us here today that haven't actually attended the conference for the last 2 days, so those who have, forgive me for repeating what has already been discussed quite thoroughly. But the interest in the Gulen movement is that it is a movement. It's transnational. It concentrates on education and interfaith and intercultural dialogue. What's interesting about it is that the people who are engaged in the movement, who do what they do it out of Islamic sensitivity, because they believe that that's what they need to do. But when you look at what they're doing, they're opening up schools, not mosques. When you look at what they're doing, they're opening up schools that are intercultural, interfaith, non-denominational. That's interesting. Dialogue in itself, the very fact that a Muslim group is engaged in intercultural dialogue, is in itself quite interesting. And this movement is spreading. It's I think about 100 countries and about 600 plus schools and counting. So it's very wide. There's no central authority. There's no central organization of the movement. So you have the global visions as espoused by Gulen, the principles, but these are locally manifested according to the local conditions of the countries in which they are based. Again, another interesting point that warrants our academic attention. I speak here more as a volunteer of the Dialogue Society and give experiences from my own life, because I think they are the ones that one can speak most truly about. And that is that as a teenager myself, 14, 15 years old, and going to school in London, being born and raised there, I went through that stage of identity crisis. Who am I? What am I? Am I a Muslim? Am I British? Am I Turkish? What is it? What am I supposed to go through? Where do my loyalties lie? Democracy, wow, it sounds good, it looks good, it feels good, but I'm a Muslim, right? I mean, this is a foreign thing. I can't allow myself to be lured into these values, So I tried to resist that. I thought, being Muslim meant resisting, not being open to that kind of influence. Be there, take advantage of it, but don't become a part of it. And then I slowly came across the sermons of Fethullah Gulen, because he is an Islamic scholar, a preacher. And I came to realize that this was a man who was spiritually devout, a practitioner. He wasn't perhaps an academic in that sense. He wasn't a reformist or a modernist who was sitting afar from reality and just telling people what things should be like. He was somebody at the grassroots levels of society, a practitioner. He would often cry when he would be giving sermons. He was deeply devout and connected to what he said, and that moved me. That was interesting. But he was also an intellectual. He was somebody who was well read in the contemporary reading. I remember listening to sermons that were recorded in 1978 on the unity and the oneness of God, and he's referring to protons and atoms and astrophysics and philosophers, and that's interesting as well. That was something that was quite important for me. And he's an alim, he's a scholar as well. So you have this combination of various characteristics, which I thought previously to be mutually exclusive, at least the characteristic of being an intellectual and an alim at the same time. And as I got more and more involved in all of this, in the 1990s, I became aware of his views on democracy. And he stood up at the Journalists and Writers Foundation, and he said, there can be no return from democracy. It's not perfect, but it's the best system we have. And there's nothing wrong for a Muslim to be a part of a democratic society. He said you have to be proactive in the society, that you have to take part in that. That was quite interesting. You see, that with me, and I can say this with all my sincerity here, is that that statement coming from a person like himself changed my views on that. And if I didn't end up becoming what Ed Hussein speaks of as an Islamist, if I didn't become a fundamentalist, it was because of those transformative views expressed by a person in the best position to do so, somebody who had the credibility to say these things. His views on human rights, freedom of belief, and I try to speak about that on my paper, very transformative. He was the one that said, let's get engaged, let's engage in interfaith and intercultural dialogue. And people resisted in Turkey, and they expressed pleasant surprise to share the table with their once considered enemies. And this changed a lot in Turkey. And now we find interfaith, intercultural dialogue meetings, reconciliation, and all of that in much abundance in Turkey. But if those who are familiar with its history and with the last 20 years will know that this at first was quite resisted. So what I'm really saying is that Gulen and the movement is transforming, it's changing people like myself more and more. And I think that that warrants our academic attention, and certainly in Europe. And we heard papers about integration, Gulen's role in helping Muslims integrate within Europe. Wow, you know, very interesting topics and arguments there, and obviously much more can be said about all of that. Moving on, because I was told to keep it brief. The conference itself, when organising the conference, we're trying to move from conferences that are monologues on dialogue to conferences that in themselves, or events in themselves that happen to be dialogue, that actually engage in dialogue. So yes, at this conference we have this subject and we're discussing it and debating it, but at the same time we want this conference to allow for this kind of meeting and discussion among people. That's what we're trying to do. And so, for example, the conference in London, we put out this title and we visited various academics, serious people, you know, and we said, this is what we want to do. What are your views? How can we do this together? And we got universities, University of Birmingham, they came on board. We got the House of Lords to come on board. We got the London Middle East Institute to come on board. And, you know, we tried to engage their views, and that was important for us. Then we got 15 or 16 editors also for this conference. We went to each and every one of them, and it wasn't our thing, and you know they were just coming in and out. We were trying to really tap into their abilities and their thoughts on this, to do something together and develop personal relationships. You know, and that's really been important for me. Outside of the conference itself, the relationships that I've developed with people and the institutional relationships that have been developed through this conference, I think, is quite important. And that's what we've tried to achieve. We submitted the call for paper. We've got 150 abstracts for the London conference, I think 170 for this one. We sent it to the editors. These are the abstracts. Score them. They scored all of those. Then we sent, you know, we asked for full papers of those who were successful. Then we got the full papers in and we sent them to the editors, those who were looking tired as a result of all of this work here today. You know, and then three editors read the papers that were allocated to them, and they classed them as accepted, conditionally accepted, or declined, or whatever.